This is a giant pile of mini PCs. At least I think they're mini PCs. What even is a mini PC? This is, I would argue, definitely a mini PC. It's absolutely tiny. I think a Steam Deck counts as a mini PC, but it's a handheld PC that's kind of a different class of its own. But then these things kind of start growing. You can get mini PCs that, fit into this box, even smaller when you take it out, but then you got a mini PC like this. This is getting pretty big. Does this even count anymore? But if I compare that to something like this, which is an actual desktop power, tower PC, like custom built, okay, this is definitely not a mini PC. So where do we cross that line between what is or is not a mini PC? And with all of these things, you're generally paying money for the form factor, because despite this being way bigger, I could actually build this cheaper than pretty much all these other mini PC systems over here. And in direct head-to-head gaming performance, this one's probably going to win for less money. But what are you going to use your mini PC for? Why do you want it to be mini? Is it just to look cool? Is it to fit into a situation like a home entertainment center, like with your TV in your living room, where maybe either you or your family aren't too supportive of having a gigantic tower sitting there in that kind of a setup, right? So if we're just trying to be, maybe smaller than a gaming console, I'd say that this absolutely counts. This probably doesn't. This is way bigger than a PS5, and this is actually smaller than a PS5 here. Now, in today's video, this whole topic kind of got started from I need to review a couple more mini PCs, at least I think they're mini PCs, and that started me questioning this whole thing about, okay, so what is a mini PC, and when I do the review, what do you even want to know about it, right? So I think this video is going to be a little bigger than a specific review on the two new mini PCs that I haven't reviewed yet that are sitting here. And talk more about just the general landscape of mini PCs, my thoughts on the whole situation, and we will test out and I will give my specific thoughts on these couple of new systems that I haven't already reviewed on the channel. So one of the biggest things that you need to think about for mini PCs is, again, what are you trading when compared to just building a big desktop PC? And like I said, in terms of, there's a cost amount, right? Because you can generally hunt for special deals on individual parts when you're building your own custom tower. So there's a cost associated with the mini PCs, but there's also differences in customizability and upgradeability. That's one of the big things that I see with the mini PC situation. And then there's also massive differences in gaming performance, as well as little features and things like that, that I think it's important to be aware of. So what do I mean by that? I think something that would be a pretty traditional mini PC is something that I have right over here, which is one of the new ones that I want to review today, except this is at least, well, part of the new one that I want to review today. So this is from Beelink. This is their GT Ultra. It has a Core i9-12900H processor, 32 gigabytes of memory, a terabyte SSD, but you'll notice there's no GPU listed. It just has the integrated graphics on the 12900H. So this, for playing games in and of itself, isn't going to do a great job in the latest big third-party, not third-party, but AAA games and things like that. And that's one of the big things with mini PCs. A lot of times you're limited to integrated graphics. That's also the case on a lot of AMD-based systems. Like in the past, I've reviewed the MinisForum Elite Mini UM780 XTX. This has more powerful integrated graphics than something like this, so it does a better job in a gaming workload by itself. But then what Beelink is throwing at me today, which is kind of, again, me questioning, okay, is this still a mini PC review? I think it is what if you go ahead and throw on a dedicated graphics docking station onto this? So what that then gets you is you can now plug in desktop graphics cards into the docking station using this, CPU and RAM, as your base system. And now you have a lot more gaming power from the dedicated graphics card, and you also have a lot more upgradeability, which is really interesting. So that's another way you can go with the mini PC route, is using that kind of a docking station setup. So that's one of the things we'll look at in today's video. But then you have systems that are not relying on integrated graphics, but are basically laptops without the keyboard and display. In other words, we've got systems that I've reviewed in the past, like we have the Ace Magic Tank 03. This has a 12900H processor inside of it, similar to this, but unlike this, which would need to get hooked up to a dedicated graphics card to have any real gaming performance, this comes with a mobile RTX 4060 GPU inside. Now, that came with a lot more gaming power overall, but it also means that it's not upgradable. It's a laptop GPU. It's not upgradable. Although you could maybe hook up things like a docking station to something like this. That's not necessarily something you can't do, but it's something to keep in mind. Also, this particular Mini PC had an issue, and I have seen it in some other Mini PCs, so something to watch out for, is if they're essentially laptop parts, it's important that they're intelligent about how they route their display outputs. Because my biggest complaint for this one in its review, because I liked the overall design and it had a lot of gaming performance, and RTX 4060 isn't far off of like a PlayStation 5 and even has better upscaler with DLSS, although it's lacking a bit in VRAM for certain settings, is that these display out ports didn't support variable refresh rate, like G-Sync, FreeSync, that kind of thing, because they were routed through the motherboard in a way that the mobile RTX 4060 doesn't directly connect and wire into the outputs. It's routed through the integrated graphics inside, which killed the variable refresh rate support, which I think on systems which, they're not absolutely massively powerful, and maybe you're trying to play, like I said, on maybe a living room TV or something like that and lock to 60 hertz, if they dip below that, a lot of TVs nowadays do support variable refresh rate. And so if you drop into 50 FPS and with variable refresh rate, it feels a lot and looks a lot better than if you don't have it. So that's a bit of an issue with some of these ones that are pretty much just a laptop system with in a mini PC form factor. This is another one where it's basically a laptop PC in a mini PC form factor. This one's from Adaman. I've reviewed this in the past, and this one has a mobile RX 7600 MXT, so it's an AMD-based system, but again, it's a mobile GPU, so it can't be directly upgraded. Now, the other mini PC I want to focus on that's new in today's video is from MinisForum, but this is a bit different. I feel like this is the most of a just like an in-between, more of a traditional mini PC where it's like a tiny little thing, and a desktop tower, where you can upgrade every individual component and customize it yourself. Because this, if we take a look at it, actually basically is just a small tower, except that, well, the motherboard pretty much is a laptop-based system. This has a 7940HX processor, which is massive, 16-core, 32-thread processor, but it's from like the technically the mobile lineup. And if I pop this open, because this does pop open just like a little tower PC pretty much, the top just pops off, we can see something interesting here, which is despite this being a laptop style motherboard, and it has, laptop style, SODIMM RAM up there. I don't know if I'm getting you a good camera angle or all that. This actually does have a dedicated graphics card, which none of these other ones have a actual separate graphics card. We do have dedicated graphics on stuff like these over here with the 4060 mobile and 7600 MXT mobile, but this actually has a low profile graphics card. We could take this out, you could actually unscrew this, take this out, and theoretically if you had a different low profile graphics card in the future that was an upgrade, that could pop in here as long as it did fit nicely into this form factor. So the form factor on this makes it much more limited in its GPU upgrades compared to a traditional desktop tower. But this thing's still absolutely tiny. It's smaller than a PS5, a gaming console, although it is much bigger than some of these other gaming PCs. So this one is pretty interesting, and it's one of the ones we'll focus on in today's video because it's one of the ones I haven't reviewed yet. However, it has one of the issues that I actually have with almost all of these mini PCs, which is when I'm custom building a gaming desktop in a tower like this, which again has its own downsides in size and whatnot, and where you could use it, I can custom choose every component. So this desktop tower, I chose to put in a Ryzen 5 5600X because that is a gaming CPU where if I'm targeting like 60 FPS gameplay on a TV kind of system or something like that, then you know, the CPU can keep up with that in almost any game. It's going to rarely be an issue on a Ryzen 5 5600X. There's some horribly optimized on the CPU games out there for sure, but in general, that's going to keep up with 60 FPS gameplay. But it's not very expensive, which means we could spend a lot more money on choosing a graphics card for it, which could enable higher settings, you know, higher resolutions, especially if you're trying to plug into 4K TV, that kind of a situation. So that's something to keep in mind with that, where a ton of these mini PCs and mini PC companies, if you want some direct feedback, I feel like they're spending a ton of money on this, on massive core count CPUs, which from a gaming perspective feels completely off. It's an unbalanced system. And that's been the case on a lot of these. Again, this is a 7940 HS CPU inside of, HX CPU inside of this one, which is a 16-core, 32-thread processor. It's absolutely massive, but games don't really scale with that. Now, if your target audience for a system like this isn't gaming, if it's more of a mini workstation, then that makes sense. So I think there's audiences where having all those cores and threads is actually going to be really exciting and one of the things you're targeting. But my channel is a gaming channel, and that's my personal interest in all of this. So for me, from the gaming side of things, I wish I could get something like this that cost less and had a smaller core count CPU. If we could just get like a, you know, Ryzen 5 7600 equivalent, 6-core, 12-thread CPU, save some money, rather than going with the 16-core, 32-thread CPU. And that's kind of the case with a lot of these. Again, this one has, this Adaman system over here, again, has the big 16-core, 32-thread CPU. It's kind of overkill for a gaming scenario. We've got even something like this with the 12900H. Like the 12900H is more than you really need for a somewhat modestly powerful gaming system. All of these are way more of a big CPU than what you get in a console or something like that. If you compare it to what like they do with the Steam Deck, Steam Decks realize that they're going for a low power and low cost system, and they use a very small and not particularly powerful CPU. Now, I would want a CPU more powerful than that for systems targeting 60 FPS in the latest games, because the Steam Deck can get held back by its CPU a little bit. But I feel like there's a bit more of a happy medium here. And this, again, just kind of tends to be the case. Even these ones with integrated graphics oftentimes have a pretty beast of a CPU inside of them. Like this one, again, with a Ryzen 7 7840 HS processor inside. Again, huge 16-core, 32-thread processor. It's a little bit more than what we really need, especially for integrated graphics. So that'd be kind of my big feedback in general on all of this. Now let's get into the actual use case, test some of these out, especially the new systems I haven't tried out yet. Which is, again, so think about the use case you're going for. I'm going to kind of go for we're targeting like a console-like experience where I'm plugging this into a 4K TV. And that's where I think having a big GPU is pretty important, but especially if you don't have a big GPU, if you're targeting a 4K TV, I do think having good upscaling is going to be important, where systems like the Adaman system over here, which is AMD based, one issue with playing with this on my 4K TV is if I'm trying to upscale to 4K relying on AMD's FSR upscaling, the output quality, especially when I'm in like performance mode or ultra performance mode upscaling, which can kind of sometimes be necessary for the kind of performance tier that we're dealing with here, the output of the image quality isn't as good as something that I can get with the NVIDIA GPUs in it. So I'm kind of interested in trying out this one that has the actual dedicated RTX 4060. And again, it being a dedicated card is interesting in both upgradeability, as well as we're not going to run into the issue we did with the 4060 in this one, which didn't properly route its outputs to get variable refresh rate support, which is cool. And then we're going to look at the whole, like, I don't know if we want to call it like a hybrid system, where, okay, what if we could put in any GPU we want on this thing with this dedicated graphics dock. So let's switch over to actually playing with some of these and take a look at the kind of experience that we get on them. Right, so I think first we'll start by testing out an older and integrated graphics-based one to kind of get you the idea of the more, I think, traditional Mini PC experience. This is the Elite Mini UM780 XTX from MinisForum. You know, it's about this big. This is, you know, a actual like Mini PC integrated graphics. Get an idea of how that does in big games on a big TV, and then we'll switch to some of these more powerful systems, the docking station, all of that, and kind of see how that goes. So when you try to use a traditional integrated graphics Mini PC like we're seeing here, as a 4K console, you can see that it's just not really up to the task. Here we're at a 4K output, but with FSR3 Ultra performance upscaling, so rendering below 1080p, but trying to upscale to a 4K output at very low settings in like a, you know, console type game here with Horizon Forbidden West. You can see that we're hanging out around 20 frames per second. It's just not really where we want to be, and due to the Ultra performance upscale, everything does look very blurry. Now, that being said, you absolutely don't have to try to output to 4K on a 4K TV. We could output to 1080p resolution and actually maybe even turn off upscaling and try to run at just a native 1080p resolution. And you can see that because now we don't have the burden of the upscale, we're now hanging out closer to 30 frames per second. We're not quite there, but we could kind of get a somewhat playable 30 FPS-ish experience in this type of game. But again, we're down here at very low settings. It's definitely not an amazing experience here. But it's also, you know, smaller than a PlayStation 5 console. You can see it sitting up above there. So, you know, it is interesting. It's just this isn't the right kind of game for it. That being said, you can have an absolutely great time gaming on the right type of games. Like here we're doing Hades, and it's at a 4K output, and you can see that we can play around 4K 60 in a game like this. But if you do want to do more of an actual, you know, console competitor experience, that's where let's try out one of our beefier but less mini PCs. Okay, so we've switched over to the bigger Mini PC, but still, you know, it is smaller than a PS5 if you look at it there. This is the MinisForum 790S7. It also does cost more than a PS5, so do keep that in mind. Now we can go ahead and try, you know, a console style game on a 4K TV, try to emulate that sort of a setup, and we're a bit under 60 FPS. And what are our actual settings? Here I'm now at the medium settings rather than going with the very low settings we tried on integrated graphics, but we are doing a full 4K output, although with DLSS performance upscaling. So coming from like a 1080p internal rendering resolution, going for a 4K output. And we're not quite hitting 60 FPS, but again, this is a variable refresh rate supporting TV, and we are getting the variable refresh rate output from the RTX 4060 dedicated graphics card that we have inside this PC. But again, we can see that the performance isn't really a locked 60 FPS exactly. And I have also noticed that in this game in particular, I'm having to be very gentle with the graphics settings I use for a 4K output, because we can easily spill over 8 gigabytes of VRAM in this particular title. Some games that's going to be an issue, some of them less so. But overall, this is a vastly better experience than we had on the more Mini PC. Now, again, though, we can absolutely change our performance targets. Like if we wanted to output just at 1080p resolution, on this system, although then we'd probably not need to do upscaling quite so much. In other words, what if we were playing at a native 1080p medium on the bigger TV? Where's my upscaling setting here? Let's go back to normal TAA. You can see here that we're well over a 60 FPS experience. And what's kind of interesting here is this is something that, you know, comparing it to the console experience, right? Like why go with a Mini PC as opposed to a, you know, a PlayStation 5 or something like that? I do think the PS5 is better value for the dollar, but gaming PCs give you just a much more customizable experience. Like you can see there, I could choose to change the rendering resolution and the graphics settings in order to get a performance that I desire. Like, do I want the higher resolution, but more like the 40 to 50 FPS range? Or do I want to go more for this, like, you know, 70 to 80 FPS range with a lower output resolution? That's totally my choice on PC, and consoles give you some graphics choices, but not nearly as much. And like, if I want to kick on frame generation, right? That's something I can do with the PC kind of experience here. Consoles don't necessarily give you that choice. I'm actually not getting a big boost in frame rate. They're kicking that on. Maybe I need to restart the game. Also, this game sometimes runs into VRAM issues, like I said, and frame generation needs some more VRAM. So again, that's kind of the headache of the PC side of things, is you have more of those things to think about as compared to the console. So again, if you think about mini PC versus console, you just got a lot more stuff to play around with. But let's also try out a few more games on this system, since this is one of the new ones that I haven't actually reviewed yet. So let's see, how does it do as kind of a 4K console experience in a variety of modern games. So one thing I'll mention as I switch the game here is also just in this review of the MinisForum 790S7 here, is I'm really hearing the fans kick on. So this certainly, and I run everything at kind of its out-of-the-box settings, so I haven't tried tweaking the fan profiles and all that, but I will just say it absolutely does seem to be a bit of a noisy system here. But anyway, let's talk a little more about the gaming performance on it and your experience versus consoles, for example. So Hellblade Senua's Saga 2 is an interesting one, because on consoles, you're locked to 30 frames per second. Now here, being a PC, we can kind of do a little more control. So I can go to a 4K output using DLSS performance upscaling. It looks pretty good. And I can overall set the settings where I want them. So I've decided to set the graphics settings at the medium preset. And with that in mind, and again, allowing some variable refresh rate, we can actually get a pretty close to 60 FPS experience in a lot of this game as I run through here. This is one of the big Unreal Engine graphical showcases. That being said, you guys see we're getting some traversal stutter, this being an Unreal Engine 5 game on PC, so there's some trade-offs there. But again, on console, I'd be kind of limited to a 60 FPS experience, maybe at some slightly higher graphics settings, and they might play around with the rendering resolutions and all that. But here I get the DLSS upscaler, which I think looks better than the upscaling we're getting from consoles. And like I said, I'm getting around a 60 FPS experience while doing it. So certainly interesting here. And I'd say a very good experience in this. And I would, certainly, even in this slow paced of a game, personally, I'm happier playing at a 60 FPS kind of experience rather than the 30 FPS limit that consoles would impose on this game, which is, again, one of the nice things about that PC platform. Here I thought we'd try out Ghost of Tsushima, and again, getting pretty good at settings with a 4K output, although again, relying a bit on upscaling. So here we're at the high graphics preset, and we're at 4K output resolution with DLSS performance upscaling. At this point, no frame generation on. And you can see here that, running up here, we are over 60 frames per second. I'm sure we could find some demanding section of the game that could probably push us below, but we can also find easier sections of the game that run above, which is nice. And again, we do have the headroom and the ability on PC, once we're at a 60 FPS baseline, then kicking on something like frame generation could make a lot of sense. Here we'll kick on DLSS frame generation, and that should smooth out some of our output frames, although once again, man, are we getting another game where we're running low on VRAM for the frame generation on DLSS? One thing though is we could try out AMD's frame generation, which I think I've noticed has a bit less of a VRAM overhead. Let's try out FSR3 frame generation, still with the DLSS performance upscale. Ooh, and there we're actually getting some bonus frame rate going up into the 80s. But again, I think the 8 gigabytes of VRAM on the GPU is causing some headaches regarding frame generation being too useful here. But overall, frame rate's pretty good. The upscale looks pretty good, and getting a pretty good experience in this particular game. I think Alan Wake 2 is still one of the best looking, but also hardest to run games out there. And consoles, I feel like the image quality gets pretty butchered by a really aggressive upscale with FSR upscaling looking a little bit blurry. Here on the MinisForum PC, we're able to play in the kind of the mid-40s in a demanding forest section of the game. There's other areas that at these settings would be closer to 60. And I think the upscale looks pretty good. Here we're using DLSS performance upscaling to a 4K output. And we are on the low graphics preset in the game, but do keep in mind that with games like Alan Wake 2, the low preset looks a lot better than ultra settings in a lot of other games. There's just really not a super low setting that you can choose. But by being able to choose the low settings in this game with the DLSS upscaling, I think we're getting a fairly good experience on this setup. I'm kind of curious if this is another game where we'll have any issues kicking on the frame generation, or if we actually have the VRAM headroom this time around. It's looking like here we are getting something out of the frame generation, but we're coming from a low enough base frame rate. And it does look like we're pushing near the 8 gigabytes of VRAM again, that I'm, again, not sure we're getting a whole lot out of that. Might kick it back off. But overall, again, as long as we have the variable refresh rate display, I think getting a pretty good experience here out of this. Although, again, not an absolute powerhouse at the 4K output. We could, again, take advantage of the fact that we could just choose to output to a lower rendering resolution, like we could go with a 1080p output rather than a 4K output, lose some resolution, and it's nice to have that choice. On the PC kind of system, we could go with a native 1080p with DLAA upscaling at the low graphics settings, which means we're still not pushing an exactly 60 FPS experience, although closer in the 50s. And if we went with maybe DLSS quality, we would then probably be able to dial in a higher frame rate if that's what we're looking for. Here we're up in the 70s now. And again, one of the nice things with the PC setup is the ability to dial in, are we wanting to trade resolution for performance rather than being locked into just one or two kind of graphics modes on that. Anyway, so that's that. It's not the miniest of mini PCs. It is, but still comparable in size, and I'd say smaller than my PlayStation 5. Gets you a lot of gaming performance. It is more expensive than a PlayStation 5, and my biggest criticism, like I said, for a gaming setup is I think the CPU is a bit overdone. For a gaming setup, if we could cut some price with a more reasonable gaming CPU, I think it would be a more balanced system and a better value overall. But I think you're getting quite a bit out of this, and I do like that you can fit in other low-profile graphics cards potentially, if you can find ones in the future that would fit in there and work for you. But now let's switch over to the docked mode style systems, because I think that'll be pretty interesting. Installing this docking setup here was actually pretty fun. So it really fit together nicely. I gotta congratulate Beelink on that kind of setup. We do get the two 8-pin power connectors out of this base station, which claims 600 to support up to 600 watt GPUs, although with two 8-pin power connectors, that should theoretically be 150 watts each, plus maybe 75 from the PCIe connector. Anyway, I've chose to go with a 4070 Super here, which will make this by far the most powerful graphical system that we've plugged in so far. Because as we saw, if I'm trying to play on an 4K TV, a little more graphics horsepower would be nice, as well as a little more VRAM. And the 4070 Super coming in at 12 gigabytes of VRAM would be kind of nice here. Anyway, so that's the overall setup here. Let's see how it does. I mean, also you could see like form factor versus the PlayStation 5. I mean, certainly taller now. And it's kind of a, like with my kids playing around here, I'm not sure how comfortable I feel with that. So I feel like this is the least comfortable system for this type of a, TV living room setup. And, the wires out here, because, the NVIDIA GPUs have the 12 VHP power connectors, and that's not the kind of power connection we get out of here, so we need the dongle. I mean, there's all sorts of that. But let's go ahead and see what the performance looks like. All right, so with the GPU dock, I'm able to plug in a 4070 Super, which gives me more VRAM and a lot more GPU just horsepower in general. So here we can see that I'm now able to absolutely max out the graphic settings at very high and at 4K resolution and get over 60 FPS in Horizon Forbidden West, although I do have to go to DLSS performance mode in order to do that. However, again, the DLSS performance upscale is looking very good on the 4K display here. And I think that now that we have more VRAM to work with, kicking on frame generation should actually do what it's supposed to do, since we have enough VRAM for it to work out. So kick that on, and we can now kind of fill out some of the frame rate on a higher refresh rate display like this being a 4K 120 Hertz TV, again with variable refresh rate and all of that. So here we're definitely getting a nice experience overall. Do keep in mind that generated frames don't increase the responsiveness of the game, but from high enough base frame rate, they do smooth out the motion fluidity. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and try out a couple other games. All right, checking out an Unreal Engine 5 showcase, because like it or not, it is one of the big engines a lot of games are used in. We have it at the maximum preset, which is the high preset. And we are over 60 FPS at a 4K output resolution, although do keep in mind that is DLSS performance. This high enough base level of frame rate where I think kicking frame generation on can also make sense, in which case we boost our output motion fluidity to almost 100 frames per second. Although again, that doesn't improve the responsiveness of the game as usual per the pros and cons and trade-offs of using frame generation. But again, overall, very good experience in this game as well. And the being able to pick a more powerful GPU is certainly paying off, although of course costs more money as well. Let's try at least one more game. All right, here we are maxing out the graphics settings in Ghost of Tsushima, other than still using some upscaling. Here we're at the very high, which is the maximum graphics settings. We're at 4K output, DLSS performance upscale. Here we'd have some room to maybe not go that aggressive on the upscale. In a lot of scenes like this one, you're running at 100 frames per second. If I get more into this town settlement area, we'll see that we'll dip more into the kind of the mid 80s or so. But overall, very good performance here. Again, that's without any frame generation or anything like that. So could go with a less aggressive upscale, though again, I think the performance upscaling from TV viewing distances looks quite good with DLSS. And yeah, there is that. So overall, I hope you guys found this video useful and interesting, highlighting the different types of mini PCs that are out there. Certainly some are more mini than others, and some are much more upgradable than others. Some of them, there's just so many, such a wide variety of options available in the mini PC market. Anyway, I hope you guys found it, like I said, useful and or interesting, but do remember that if you don't need it to be a mini PC, I think in general you get better performance per dollar just by building a more standard desktop PC. But again, there's a coolness factor to the small builds. They're kind of fun. They can fit in places that maybe don't make sense with a full build. Like I said, I like it kind of in an entertainment center type setup, as well as I like it in my office at work, actually my classroom. I teach. I can't fit a big gaming PC there, but a mini PC is pretty unassuming and I can get some gaming in on my lunch breaks. Hope everybody has an excellent day.